Story 1. April Fool's Day, 1974. A man burned 70 rubber tires on a dormant volcano in Alaska. This has to be one of the best pranks. He waited 3 years to get a helicopter to fly the tires to the top of the volcano for picture-perfect conditions. He even got the Coast Guard called out. Story 2. Mozart didn't like the singer so much that he wrote a piece for her with high and low notes constantly because he noticed that when she hit low notes, her chin went to her chest, and when she hit high notes, her head would fling back. So it was like she was bobbing like a chicken. Story 3. There was a Prussian, I can't remember his name, who managed to make an officer uniform out of scraps of clothing. He used it to convince a few guards on patrol to follow him into a government building, ordered the arrest of the man in charge, confiscated all the money personally, and sent the arrested man to Berlin, claiming it was all on the order of the king. He then ditched the uniform, got on a train to Berlin, and managed to beat the guards there. He then sat back and watched the absolute confusion happen. The guy was eventually arrested, but the public turned him into a celebrity and his actions into a play that was performed all over Germany. He wasn't incarcerated for long, and after his release, he lived an easy life from then on. Story 4. In the 1930s to 1940s, the British Broadcasting Corporation did an April Fool's broadcast where they told people how spaghetti was made on trees. They literally showed fake spaghetti trees, and since not many people at that time knew how spaghetti was made, lots of people believed it. Story 5. The old-timey New York City newspaper, The Sun, in my opinion. In the 19th century, they published some articles about the presence of life on the moon, like unicorns, winged humans, and other creatures who built temples and lived peacefully. This caused a massive moon craze until it was later revealed as fake. Story 6. Technically, this isn't a troll since it was serving a purpose, but Admiral Nelson was escaping a French fleet when a man fell overboard. It was Nelson's policy to never leave anyone behind, so he turned his ship around to pick him up. The French saw his ship turn back toward them, assumed he had reinforcements coming beyond the horizon, so they turned and ran. Story 7. I was thinking more about the mortician who patented the automatic telephone switch 3 years after finding out his rival's wife worked as a telephone operator and would reroute calls asking for his funeral parlor to her husband's. The guy put a whole worldwide workforce out of work for one person's actions. Thank you for the upvotes and awards. You guys are awesome. Story 8. Theodore Hook, the perpetrator of the Berners Street hoax in London in 1810, sent thousands of letters summoning all manner of various vendors, service people, physicians, dignitaries, and others to come to one random person's home. This literally shut down a large part of London as they all descended upon the same address throughout the day, all while Hook and a friend sat watching from a house across the street, presumably laughing the entire time. Story 9. In China, there was the War of the Three Kingdoms. The Wei, Shu, and Wu. Two of their armies met in battle, and the smaller was out of arrows. They were separated by a river. One night, the leader of the smaller army stocked the front of their boats and rafts with straw bales and moved toward the opposing army over the river. They were immediately hailed with arrows. The men ducked behind the straw while the arrows stuck in the straw, undamaged. They then sailed away and yelled, "We thank you for the arrows. We will return them shortly." This may just be a tall tale from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but it may be true. Story 10. Stephen Hawking was in an interview when a cord was unplugged, and an alarm went off. This was before he was completely immobile, and he slumped in his chair. The people interviewing him were scared out of their minds until they realized that he was all right and chuckling at his joke. The cord and alarm were for a computer. Story 11. I forget the name, but that one guy from the 1800s who bought specific tickets to a play and then gave them away to bald men on the street so that when everyone took their seats, the bald men's heads reflected the light from the stage, and they spelled out a word as seen from the stage. Story 12. Marcel Duchamp, who, among other fun things, submitted a urinal as an art piece to the Society of Independent Artists under a pseudonym and was then part of the board set to approve pieces. He also spread rumors of another piece he was working on so people wouldn't suspect anything. Love that guy. Plus, he sparked an interesting discussion in art. Also, it is worth mentioning that, as someone pointed out, the urinal may have actually been submitted by a woman named Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, and Duchamp acted more as a curator. The more you know. Story 13. He became notorious for his philosophical stunts, such as carrying a lamp during the day, claiming to be looking for an honest man. He criticized Plato, disputed his interpretation of Socrates, and sabotaged his lectures, sometimes distracting listeners by bringing food and eating during the discussions. Diogenes was also noted for having mocked Alexander the Great, both in public and to his face when he visited Corinth in 336 before Christ. Story 14. I posted this comment once on Reddit about the best forget it. I'll do it myself moment in history, but I think the tale of Agent Garbo, the double agent whose real name was Juan Pujol Garcia, applies here too. He deceived Hitler and the Nazi regime so thoroughly it boggles the mind, and he didn't merely get away with it, he was given an iron cross by them. Okay, so it's time for me to talk about Juan Pujol Garcia. A hotel clerk and former unsuccessful chicken farmer was frustrated with the fascist government of Spain. Germany's warmongering was getting scary. France had fallen, the Soviet Union and United States were both neutral so far, and only Britain was left to stand against the Nazis. As he said years later, he believed he had to do something for the good of humanity. Even though, by all accounts, he was a nobody, just a hotel clerk and failed chicken farmer, who'd briefly served on both sides of the Spanish Civil War, leaving with a dislike of fascism and communism. So Juan, naturally, decided to become a spy and undermine Hitler as hard as he could. Logical career move for a hotel clerk, I'm sure you'll agree. But the British, who he wanted to help, weren't interested. He'd asked to help at the embassy in Madrid several times. The British were all like, "Who are you? Actually, never mind, we don't care. You can't do anything to help us. And we don't really trust you, so scram." Juan, of course, was undeterred. He decided that the Nazis had to be destroyed, and he figured it would be easier to do so from within. So he reinvented himself as a fanatically fascist government official and applied to help the German spy on the British, claiming he had a way to actually get undercover to Britain to spy on them. All of this was, of course, complete nonsense. The Germans said, "Sure, we could use the help," and hired him. Since he couldn't get to Britain, he went to Lisbon, Portugal, frequenting the library to learn about Britain so he could convincingly just make things up. He sent the German Navy on a wild goose chase for a non-existent naval convoy at the Mediterranean island of Malta. The Germans were convinced he was the best spy they had in Britain. After all, the rest of them kept getting captured, except for the ones Garcia was recruiting, or rather, inventing. His recruits were as real as the Maltese convoy, which is to say, not at all real. They did make good scapegoats to blame when his intel was off. The British, meanwhile, were looking for him since the German codes they were breaking showed the Germans allegedly had a spy setting up a spy ring in Britain. But then they read his messages. One allegedly had a Scottish contact who would do anything for a liter of wine. That tipped the British off that someone was just toying with German intelligence. I mean, the metric system, anyone? A Scotsman who drinks wine. Unrealistic. So eventually the Lisbon British Embassy tipped off the British intelligence agency MI6 that this guy in Lisbon was trying to tell them he was literally a German intelligence agent and would like to help fight the Nazis, please. So they brought him to Britain and gave him the codename Agent Garbo. He teamed up with MI6 where he continued to mislead the Nazis with a combination of pure lies, true but useless intel, and useful intel that arrived just a bit too late to help the Germans at all. He convinced the Germans D-Day was a feint, not the main Allied invasion. That would come farther east at Calais, he convinced the Germans. The 1st United States Army Group, led by General Patton, would lead it. The 1st United States Army Group was made of divisions that didn't exist in an empty base with inflated fake tanks and airplanes to convince German planes flying above Dover it was legitimate. The Germans kept a large number of troops and tank divisions back at Calais to repel an invasion force which never landed. These troops could have stopped the Allied landings at Normandy. Instead, they sat at Calais doing nothing. The Germans gave Pujol the Iron Cross Second Class for his essential aid to the Nazi regime. The British government soon after made him a member of the Order of the British Empire. His German spy handler gave him his Iron Cross in person after the war, apologizing profusely for failing to win the war he'd helped them so much with. I imagine it was difficult to keep a straight face for that conversation. Summary: a failed chicken farmer from Spain wages a personal war of lies against Nazi Germany and wins. Story 15. This Chinese general, whose city was besieged by a much larger army, opened the main gate and sat atop it playing his flute. The enemy thought it was a trap, so they packed their stuff and left. Story 16. Giles Corey, a farmer caught up in the Salem witch trials. He was sentenced to pressing, being slowly crushed by stones, to force him to make a plea. Every time he was questioned, he simply said, "More weight." He died without making a plea. Story 17. The individual who managed to get a network news program to announce that a plane crash was piloted by 4 men with the names Hu Li Fuck, Sum Ting Wong, Wei Tu Lo, Bang Ding Ao. Story 18. Basil Zaharoff, a Greek arms dealer, once donated a submarine to the Greek government. He then told the Turks that the Greeks had a submarine and sold them 2 submarines. Lastly, he went to the Russians and told them the Turks had 2 submarines, so he sold them 2 as well. None of the submarines actually worked. Story 19. The guy that sent the first spam email. On May 3, 1978, Gary Thurk sent the first spam email on ARPANET, marketing the DESA System 20 family of office computers. He succeeded in annoying many people, and the governing authorities even started a crackdown, stating, "Nobody should be allowed to send a message with a header that long, no matter what it is about." Thurk didn't know it at the time, but he created a new type of email. Story 20. Russians continuously retreated when Napoleon tried to attack them, resulting in him giving up due to the situations his army was facing, such as disease. Story 21. Orson Welles did a radio play that told people the Martians were invading. The next day, he told everyone that his play had freaked out millions of people when it was a few dozen at most. Story 22. Don't know if this has been said, but Stalin convicted his closest friends of treason, then had them sentenced to death. Later on, they were blindfolded and awaiting the firing squad's bullets. The squad fired blanks. Stalin pulled the blindfolds off and said, "Got you." Legend. Story 23. Benjamin Franklin versus Leeds. Titan's father, Daniel Leeds, was a devout Quaker who fell out with the local Quaker community when he began publishing the Almanac in 1687. Daniel Leeds turned over publication to his son, Titan, in 1716. The American Almanac predated Franklin's Almanac. Franklin used the first edition of his almanac to promote the hoax prediction of Leeds's death on October 17, 1733, at 3:29 p.m., at the very instant of the conjunction of the Sun and Mercury. He encouraged his readers to buy next year's edition of Poor Richard's Almanac to see if Franklin was right, as a publicity stunt and attempt to drive Titan Leeds's American Almanac out of business. When the date of Leeds's supposed passing had come and gone, Franklin published Leeds's obituary anyway. When challenged by the very much alive Leeds, Franklin insisted that Leeds had in fact died, but that he was being impersonated by an inferior publisher. When Leeds actually died in 1738, Franklin publicly commended the impostors for ending their charade. Story 24. George Salmanazar, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Frenchman, pretended to be a royal from the island of Formosa, now modern-day Taiwan. He created his own fake religion, diet, and language with complex syntax that he taught in universities across Europe. This took place in the 17th century. Story 25. This will be buried, but Sergei Korolev was getting frustrated with the Soviet government because they were not interested in funding his space exploration projects. So, he got his propaganda group to publish articles about how Russia was getting close to sending something into space. As expected, the United States took the bait and started working on their satellite program. The Soviet government became anxious when they saw the United States doing that, so they funded Korolev's projects. He and his group played them well. Story 26. The employee at the Four Seasons Landscape took the reservation for the Trump campaign without asking questions. Clearly, they knew it was a mistake. It's not like their company is a well-known place for presidential speeches. Story 27. Herostratus burned the Temple of Artemis around 400 BC, just for the laughs and the notoriety, apparently. They killed him for it, painfully, and enacted a law forbidding his name from ever being mentioned. Yet here we are more than 2,000 years later, and Herostratus and his stunt are not forgotten. Story 28. Sylvia Knight performing for Iceland in Eurovision 2006. I swear, Legitimately, no one apart from Iceland knew what was going on and why she acted the way she did. Being completely rude during interviews and then her ridiculous song plus the stage presence. Sylvia Knight was an over-the-top character from a fake Icelandic reality television show. So iconic. Story 29. Steve Wilhite. He invented the graphics interchange format, then he won a Webby Award for it. Webby Award speeches are only allowed to be 5 words long. He went up and said, "It's pronounced GIF, not GIF. God himself could come down and tell me that. I wouldn't believe it. It's GIF. Forever. Bye." Story 30. Almost everything that's considered crazy about him is because he mocked the Senate so intensely that they tarnished his legacy. He was one of the few emperors to genuinely invest in Roman infrastructure with Roman money, meaning he taxed the senatorial class to rebuild public waterways. He had a mutually contemptuous relationship with the Senate as emperor. He was aware of his immense power and was cautious enough to avoid being killed for using it. Historians are still unraveling what was merely Caligula's mocking behavior recontextualized for a smear campaign.